Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Andrew became the manager of the restaurant quite recently. Before that, the restaurant had been owned by his father, who had decided to retire from the business because of ill health. Once, before the financial boom of the 90s, Jacob worked there as an assistant cook. It was only later, thanks to his determination and love of gourmet cuisine, that he became the first fiddle of the restaurant. His dishes were always a great success with the customers, which in turn made a quite tangible contribution to the overall coffers. When global changes began in the country, Jacob did not abandon the restaurant and worked in it even when, due to poor funding, it turned into a regular canteen for little reason. Unlike his colleagues who were looking for better places, the man survived all the hard times and after saving up money, one day became the owner of this restaurant. Of course, for someone the transformation of a chef into the owner of an establishment seems unbelievable, but at that time more shocking metamorphoses, caused by global changes in the country, happened to the people. Since Jacob devoted almost all his free time to the restaurant, he started a family quite late. His friends and acquaintances considered him a confirmed bachelor, not even guessing that deep down inside the man dreamed of having a family and a child. Jacob bound himself to family ties at a fairly mature age, and this marriage turned out to be conscious and strong. The wise businessman became a father at 45, when many of his acquaintances were already getting ready to go to their sons' or daughters' graduation parties. Andrew grew up an obedient and intelligent boy, which could not but please his father. He began to speak early, and then quite quickly switched to reading books, which in time turned into a real hobby for him. Thanks to his father, Andrew received a good education in his country, not abroad, as it was customary for the business class. You don't need to sit around at Harvard and Yale. You have to live here anyway, so you'll have to study here too, Jacob admonished his son. Andrew had not forgotten his father's science, and having graduated from the economics department of the local university, set out on the slippery slope of a budding businessman. By that time, Andrew's mother died suddenly of a heart attack, and Jacob himself had serious health problems on a nervous breakdown, so he had to look for a replacement as a matter of urgency. Having tried all possible candidates, the businessman chose his son. Despite his apparent youth, Andrew had the business acumen that was essential in any business. When he became the owner of the restaurant, he did not rearrange everything to his liking and did not change the employees who had been working there for several years. The only thing that bothered Andrew was that with his arrival, the restaurant's losses increased dramatically, which had never been before. Trying to figure out the reason, the young businessman had several conversations with the staff, but the losses were still consistently high. I don't understand what's going on. On paper, everything seems to add up, incoming and outgoing, but in reality, it's completely different, Andrew said to his administrator, studying the reports once again. William was a man of great ambition and secretly envied his more successful boss, so he told Andrew only flattering lies to his eyes, but behind his back he criticized him as much as he could. It is difficult to say whether the new owner of the restaurant was aware of such unflattering behavior of his subordinate or not, but the fact remained the fact. The losses continued to mount, and the culprit was still missing. He didn't want to go to his father with the problem. First of all, Jacob's health was still not good, and secondly, Andrew wanted to find out for himself. After all, if he needed help solving problems now, things would become even more complicated in the future. Andrew, can I make you some coffee? Opening the door of the owner's office, the young waitress asked. Yes, Evelyn. I won't say no, replied the young businessman. With cream, as usual. Yes, and 1 spoonful of sugar, please. After seeing the waitress off, Andrew went back to studying the documents and records. The boy felt that the solution was close, but all he had to do to get to it was to pull the right thread. But how to choose the thread that, like the mythical Ariadne, would lead him to the right place? The door to the restaurant owner's office opened again, and Evelyn appeared with a tray of sizzling coffee and a saucer of the freshest croissants. "Thank you, Evelyn," Andrew said without raising his head. The waitress put the tray on the table and froze in indecision. "Anything else?" the businessman asked. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to tell Andrew something that might seem strange or even shocking. "Andrew, I don't even know how to say it." "Well, you'd better see it for yourself." Embarrassed by her own words, Evelyn answered. Andrew looked at the waitress with surprise and got up from the table. Evelyn was always a loud girl. Not everyone could embarrass her. She, more than anyone else, knew how to make eyes at customers in order to squeeze as much as possible tips from them. Suddenly, she was as shy as a high school girl on a first date. What on earth was going on in there? Did she notice a ghost or something? Followed the waitress, thought Andrew. When the businessman finally entered the hall, he indeed saw something strange. Andrew was surprised by the fact that next to the reception desk stood a boy of about 6 years old, holding in his hand a rather shabby canvas bag. The boy's appearance was so pathetic that Andrew's heart ached. His clothes looked old and had obviously been taken off someone else's shoulder. His panties, tucked in several times, would have fallen off his skinny body if they had not been supported by a sash, apparently taken from a woman's bathrobe. The boots were at least 2 sizes too big, which made the boy look more like Little Flower from the cartoon of the same name than a junior high school boy. The burnt jacket also left much to be desired, which could not but arouse pity in those around him. Next to the boy stood the receptionist, William, whose face was visibly squeamish and arrogant. It was obvious that the man did not care about the boy, who had wandered into an expensive restaurant for some unknown reason. A little further away, the doorman Mike, who in the past had served first in the police and then in the current police force, stood there. After retiring, the man could not sit idly by, and as surprising as it sounded to his former colleagues, took a job as a doorman in a restaurant. On the whole, he liked his job. Stable high wages, a gentle schedule, and the opportunity to have a nice meal on the house. All this pleased Mike, who during his time in the police force had had his share of bad luck. There were no emergencies in the restaurant at all, because most of the customers were quiet and cultured people. Mike had seen all sorts of things in his life, but this was the first time he had encountered something like this. At first, he did not want to let the boy into the lobby of the restaurant, but then, when he saw tears in his eyes, he immediately kind of mollified and mechanically opened the door. And now, standing next to the boy, Mike was embarrassed and ashamed that for the first time in his years at the restaurant, he could not fulfill his direct duties and take the boy outside. Seeing this scene, Andrew came closer and, leaning over the boy, asked sympathetically, "What do you want, kid? Are you lost or hungry?" The boy looked at the man with eyes full of tears and then answered, "I'd like some leftovers from the kitchen." "Not much at all." "Man, you're wasting them anyway. I've seen the janitor put them in the food waste bin. So maybe I'll get something too." To say that the boy's request shocked Andrew was nothing. It was the 21st century, and this boy was asking for scraps from the kitchen, which not every caring owner would feed his dog. And here was a boy. "So are you hungry, kid? That's not a problem at all. Now, I'll instruct the chef, and he'll make you whatever you want. And if you don't have time to wait, then choose from what's available right now. You okay? Can you read? Here, take the menu and choose anything you want," Andrew exclaimed, barely able to contain his excitement. The boy looked at the restaurant owner again, then quietly added, "For me, not for myself. Uncle. For my mother. She's sick. She can hardly stand up. Doctors say she needs an operation. And we don't have the money. I earn what I can, begging on the street in general. I also read the paper to a blind old man named Kevin in the morning. For that, he gives me $10 at a time." The realization of the boy's words sent Andrew into a state of deep shock. The boy's story struck the restaurant owner to the core. Taking the boy by the hand, he sat him down at the nearest table and asked the waitress to bring him something tasty. Then Andrew sat across from me and said, "So, would you like to have lunch with me? You'll eat first, and then you can take care of the leftovers, which of course I won't give you." Tears welled up in the boy's eyes again. "What do you mean, you can't give it to me, Uncle? I have to bring my mother something to eat. Otherwise, I don't agree. And I don't need your lunch." Andrew smiled, and admiring the character of the baby, hurried to reassure him. "Well, don't jump to conclusions. I mean, I won't give you any leftovers from the kitchen, but I'll measure out as much food as you can carry. What's your name?" "My name is Andrew." "And I'm Liam," the boy whispered softly. "Well, now we have met," said Andrew and held out his broad palm to the baby. Soon, they were eating a delicious carco soup prepared in hot water by the restaurant's chef. The main course was French fries, a Caesar salad, and a pork chop the size of which made the boy shudder. All this culinary splendor Liam chose himself, proud of the fact that for the first time in his life, he ordered in a real restaurant. Looking at the boy from time to time, Andrew was proud that he was able to please him. Deep down, the young businessman dreamed of having children of his own, but in order to have them, he first had to at least get married. Andrew did not have a steady girlfriend, and in his 28 years he was considered an incorrigible bachelor. He did have affairs, and they happened quite often. But to no avail, they did not lead to anything definite in the end. Jacob often criticized his son for this, understanding the importance of family in any man's life. "Get married, have a bunch of kids, and give me a nice present for my old age," said the elderly businessman. "Dad, why do I always have to have lots of children? Maybe I only want to pay attention to one." "You just gave birth to me and stopped there," answered Andrew in a joking tone. "And here, you're right. It's all in color." Those were the times, Andrew. Difficult times. And now you have calm and stability. "When I was young, I didn't even dream of that," Jacob countered. At that time, Andrew did not pay much attention to his father's words, but now, looking at little Liam, he felt very uncomfortable. Of course, the boy was not able to eat all the dishes he had chosen and limited himself to just tasting a little of each. It's been a long time since I ate this much and delicious. My mom, when she wasn't sick, she was a good cook too, especially the pancakes, Liam said, stroking his visibly rounded belly. "Your mother is good. What about your father? Did he leave you?" Andrew asked cautiously. "Nah, I never saw him, and my mom never told me. But it seems to me that he is either an astronaut or a pilot." "Oh, what makes you think that?" Andrew asked, blotting his lips with a napkin. "Well, that's obvious to everyone. Uncle Andrew, you're like a little boy, for God's sake. If my dad were someone else, he would certainly live with us. But as it is, he's probably stuck on an abandoned space station, waiting to be taken back. You know how time passes differently in space, right? Well, a year in 2, 3, maybe 10 years, Liam replied in a mature way. Once again, Andrew's heart felt a treacherous clench. It pained the young businessman to see the 6-year-old boy trying to explain to himself what his parents really had to explain to his son. Having ordered that the boy's groceries be collected, Andrew decided to drive him home in his car. The reason was not only that the grocery bag was quite large, but also that it was not appropriate for a 6-year-old boy to be walking alone in a huge metropolis. When he saw Andrew's fancy SUV, Liam was ready to jump for joy like a little kangaroo. The boy got so excited that his improvised sash came undone, and his pants slid down treacherously. "Oh, an accident," Liam muttered embarrassedly. Andrew smiled and immediately caught himself thinking that it would be a good idea to update the boy's closet. Putting the boy in the back seat, the businessman got behind the wheel of his SUV. Liam immediately put his face to the window, intending to watch the road closely while driving. Andrew always drove carefully, and this time he was even more careful. He knew that there was a little passenger behind him who had to be taken care of as the apple of his eye. Seeing a store with baby clothes on the way, Andrew parked the car on the side of the road and turned to Liam. "Uncle, where are we going?" "It's a long way to my house," the boy said. "Oh, come on. Don't be afraid. Let's go to the store and get you some clothes. You can't eat at the best restaurant in town and look like a homeless kid." Andrew smiled. Liam brightened up when he heard about the new clothes. Frankly speaking, he himself was tired of the things his mother had bought on the cheap sale. When Andrew entered the store, he immediately called the saleswoman and explained to her exactly what he wanted to buy for the boy. Soon, Liam got rid of his old clothes and got new jeans, a warm button-down sweater, and good-looking shoes that were nothing like his old ones. "Wow, what a handsome boy he turned out to be. He looks like a bridegroom," said the saleswoman with a smile. Realizing that the boy would need a change of clothes, Andrew bought him exactly the same set of clothes. "Well there, now we can go to your mother," the man said with a sense of accomplishment. Andrew himself could not explain to himself the exact reason why he was helping this boy. It was just that, at a certain moment, his heart was literally crushed by the fact that there was such a wonderful little boy who, by the will of an evil fate, was forced to starve and beg for scraps in the restaurant. Andrew has always been a compassionate person and has never passed by the underprivileged of this world. Helping shelters for homeless animals and orphanages, the young businessman did not expect any special gratitude and did not PR himself on people. All this came from the heart and was aimed primarily to help, not to satisfy his own ambitions. Andrew did not know that at this very moment, the administrator and also the right hand of the owner of the restaurant is pouring dirt on him in the eyes of his subordinates. And why did he get mixed up with that bum? He fed him, got him drunk. Now let's bring in all the beggars from the street and have a buffet. "You can't save them all anyway," said William, looking like an experienced lecturer. The waitresses looked cautiously at the receptionist, knowing full well that they should not voice their opinions out loud, especially if it goes against the boss's opinion. They understood that they could not say such things to Andrew's face, and that's why they behaved so impudently only in his absence. They were about the same age, but their personalities were as strikingly different as a mouse is different from a cat, and vice versa. Deep down, William envied the more fortunate Andrew, whose father had presented him with such a lucrative business on a silver platter. William's parents were alcoholics and could only leave him a pile of debts and an old apartment without repair. That's why, getting a job in Andrew's restaurant, he decided to succeed in this particular field. And now, by deliberately degrading the discipline in his absence, William was first of all trying to strengthen his own position. At the same time, Andrew drove up to the house Liam had listed. As it turned out, he and his mother lived in a private house in the suburbs. A quick glance was enough for the businessman to realize that people of low income lived in this shabby house. The chimney was leaning to one side, the paint on the window frames was peeling, and the shingles were old, mossy in places. "Yeah, I guess things are really bad for Liam's mom," the man thought with a sad sigh. While the boy fiddled with the intractable lock on the front door, Andrew got out of the car with a bag of groceries and belongings in both hands. Finally, Liam managed to get the key out of the keyhole and inside. Andrew cautiously followed. The house smelled of medicine, herbal remedies, and something that the businessman's sense of smell could not identify. "Mom, I'm back, and I brought you something to eat," the boy exclaimed as he crossed the threshold into the hallway. "Thank you, son. You're the only breadwinner I've got left. Just promise not to beg anymore." "Okay, I'm not going to be a beggar anymore," came a faint female voice from the back room. Andrew hesitantly stood still unsure of what to do next. The man felt a certain uneasiness about his unceremonious visit. "Come on, Uncle Andrew. I'll introduce you to my mother. She's nice." The businessman answered the boy with an embarrassed smile, and then cautiously entered the room. Andrew had expected to see something like this, but what he saw before his eyes struck him to the core. On the bed lay a thin, sickly, weary woman whose eyes looked at the world through the prism of pain and despair. Next to the bed was a nightstand, on which all sorts of vials and packages of medicine lined up in a row. Even to a layman, it was clear that the young woman lying on the bed was seriously ill. Andrew had never felt so uncomfortable in his life. Since the businessman deliberately did not want to embarrass the woman with his presence, he tried not to look her in the face. But when Andrew did meet the woman's eyes, his heart started beating furiously. The woman's face seemed painfully familiar and familiar to him. The déjà vu effect made him pale and invariably sent a wave of prickly shivers down his spine. "Emily, is that you? How is that even possible?" the businessman exclaimed and walked over to the bed. But the woman lying on top of her made surprised eyes and looked at him incomprehensible. "I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. My name is Kathy, and Emily is my older sister," the woman babbled. Andrew shuddered and looked again at the face of the lady of the house. "No, it's definitely her. Emily, the girl from the past," the man said in his head. Andrew's consciousness suddenly blurred, as if someone had deliberately forced him to look through a fogged-up lens. The waves of memory transported the businessman back to a place where he was only 21, and life seemed enchantingly unpredictable. That autumn evening, he was driving on the highway in his father's Ford and did not even think about the fact that in half a kilometer his car would stall and become on the side of the road as a pillar. Andrew was returning from friends who lived in a nearby town. They used to meet almost regularly, and this kind of trip was not uncommon. As luck would have it, terrible bad weather broke out, making it almost impossible to dig under the hood during the storm and torrential rain. The engine failure was the force majeure that Andrew feared most of all. The track, flooded with muddy streams, looked deserted, which was unspeakably upsetting to the stranded fellow. The communication in the area was terrible, and who would want to follow him in such bad weather? Understanding the hopelessness of his situation, Andrew sat behind the wheel of the stalled car and watched the droplets dripping down the windshield. Suddenly, turning his head to the right, he saw a road sign indicating a small village. Andrew could not remember the name, but it was associated with the forest. What if I ask the locals for help? It's going to get dark soon, and then I'll have to spend the night in the car, thought Andrew. The decision came easily to him. The guy has always been a man of action and has never been afraid of difficulties. Clasping his jacket up to his throat, Andrew threw the hood over his head and left the cozy cabin of the car. But outside the rain was already whipping with all its might, and the wind was howling with a piercing penetration to the bones. Trying not to get soaked in the sticky mud that swarmed the dirt road, Andrew hurried towards the village. No matter how hard he tried, his pants and shoes were still stained with clay. He had to walk about half a kilometer in the pouring rain before he reached the village. Andrew randomly approached the first house he saw and knocked on the window. There was a light on inside, which increased his chances of success. Fortunately, that's how it turned out. Soon, there was a distinctive clang of the latch being opened, and a petite girl in her 20s appeared on the threshold. When she saw a muddy Andrew in front of her, she gave a low groan and, without further ado, led him into the house. "Are you comfortable with me dropping in like this, like a snowball on your head?" asked Andrew. "Don't worry. Right now, I'm alone. My mother is in the hospital, and my sister is in town. That's why I'm the housekeeper," the girl replied nonchalantly. Andrew sincerely admired her restraint. Not only was the stranger not afraid to let a strange guy into the house, but she acted as if nothing special had happened. As it turned out later, the girl's name was Emily, and she was born and raised in this village. After listening to Andrew, the first thing she did was to help him clean up and then to give him some hot tea. It so happened that evening, Andrew did not ask for help in the neighboring yards and stayed in the small, comfortable kingdom of peace and quiet. To his sincere surprise, Emily turned out to be a pleasant companion who could hold a conversation on almost any topic. Thus, Andrew learned that her younger sister works as a saleswoman in the district center, and her mother is in the hospital after a stroke. She'd, on the other hand, stay behind to take care of the house and feed the cattle. Listening to Emily's story, Andrew caught himself thinking that living in the city, he knows absolutely nothing about the manners of the countryside. It was interesting to hear that this year the cow was giving twice as much milk as last year, or that it would be a good idea to fix the roof because in a heavy downpour it leaks a little. Unrecognizable to himself, Andrew experienced unparalleled mental comfort next to this fragile and quivering like a young doe girl. That the feelings were mutual, the young people did not even doubt. Andrew and Emily felt it in their hearts, and the moment when they found themselves in each other's arms was not a surprise for them. The young people understood that they might never see each other again and indulged in passion desperately and tenderly. That October night was their first, and at the same time, their last date, and it left an indelible mark on their memory. It was a real madness, which lasted only a few hours, and in the morning only the crumpled sheets and tired eyes of Andrew and Emily reminded of what had happened the day before. Now it is difficult to judge what was the reason for their further separation. Perhaps it was all the fault of Andrew's youth, who could not yet understand people, and realized too late that Emily was sent to him by fate itself. After a while, having suffered a lot in unsuccessful relationships, the young businessman came to his senses and even went to that very village. But he didn't find Emily there. The door and windows of the cottage were boarded up, and on the fence there was only one word, "For sale," written in chalk. Attempts to find Emily did not bring the desired success, and it is unlikely that Andrew was going to put much effort into it. He was young and looked forward with the optimism and self-confidence of his age. And now, 7 years after these events, Andrew stood looking at the replica of his beloved Emily, who was stubbornly resisting the insidious disease. The businessman realized that what he really saw before him was not Emily, but her younger sister Kathy, who was the spitting image of the girl from the village. "I'm sorry, for God's sake. I'm mistaken. You look so much like Emily. Where is she, then?" Andrew said with an embarrassed cough. Kathy suddenly turned pale, and her breathing became hoarse and intermittent. The businessman tensed up, knowing full well that he did not know how to give first aid. Fortunately, Kathy recovered fairly quickly and did not have to be rescued. Gathering her courage, she asked Liam to go into the other room and closed the door behind her. Then, Kathy looked into Andrew's eyes and said, "Emily died 6 years ago. Difficult childbirth. Bleeding opened up, and the local medicine. Well, you know how she is. Liam was her son. Next, our mother passed away. Like a son," Andrew exclaimed, trembling with exertion. "I could not allow my late sister's son to end up in an orphanage. She didn't have a husband, so I adopted the baby. Liam doesn't know he's not my son. I hope it remains a mystery to him," Kathy continued with a sad sigh. Even though the room was quite cool, Andrew could still feel the heat inside, which made his cheeks flare up like the touch of a red-hot stove. Only now did the businessman realize that by the time he decided to find Emily, she was probably already dead, since she didn't have a husband. Then by the timeline, Liam. Oh my God, by the timeline Liam could be my son. Andrew's mind reeled, making him once again covered in clammy sweat. "Did you know my dead sister?" interrupted Kathy's lingering pause. Andrew's eyes had already lost the shroud that had previously prevented him from concentrating his thoughts. "Yes, I knew Emily. Briefly, but I knew her," said the businessman with a shaky voice. Kathy looked into Andrew's eyes carefully, which made him feel uncomfortable. The man felt as if he was being seen through, and his misunderstandings looked ridiculous at the very least. In order to move the conversation in a different direction, Andrew asked, "What about your health? Is there anything I can do to help?" Kathy lowered her eyes ashamedly, then answered quietly, "I have a tumor. I needed an operation. Chemotherapy doesn't work in these cases. That's why I kept my hair. Sorry for the details. Liam understands. She's trying to help. But how can you raise money for surgery by begging on the street? And I'm really ashamed that I don't have the strength to look after my son. Well, you have a wonderful son. Take my word for it. He wasn't begging. He was honestly asking for help. Well, I did. I own a restaurant downtown, so all the food and groceries are my responsibility. Andrew tried to smooth over the awkward situation. Kathy sighed sadly and tried to get into a more comfortable position in bed. The woman's face showed that she was in pain, but she did not show it and did not mention it once in the conversation. From time to time, as he glanced at the lady of the house, Andrew caught himself wondering how much she resembled her older sister Emily. The same silky curls, a dimple on the chin, and the noble oval of the face, like a born aristocrat, once again admired Andrew. For himself, the businessman made up his mind a long time ago. Feeling guilty before the late Emily, Andrew at all costs wanted to save her sister. Let them. I'll sell the car, the house, and even the restaurant if I have to. But I'll help Kathy and my little son Liam. The man thought to himself. After saying goodbye to Kathy and her adopted son, Andrew left the house and drove to the restaurant. The businessman was anxious to find out exactly how much money he could withdraw from the turnover to pay for Kathy's operation. The receptionist greeted the boss unfriendly. It was obvious that William wanted to tell him another quip, but restrained himself and conducted his behind-the-scenes game. How about William's losses? Have they been resolved? I don't like this situation at all. It reeks of betrayal. But we're all friends. No one to think about. Andrew asked in a businesslike manner. I don't know, boss. Everything seems to be the same. Same proven suppliers. Good quality products. The customers are satisfied. Why? Is there a problem? Said William, looking ingratiatingly into his eyes. Andrew sensed that something was wrong with the administrator, but he didn't have the time or energy to deal with it once and for all. At the moment, the most important thing was Kathy's health, which in the very near future might require medical attention. Without putting things off, Andrew immediately called a clinic specializing in this very kind of disease that had been diagnosed to Liam's mother. But when the businessman found out the amount of money he needed to raise, sadness and dismay showed on his face. To say that a lot of money was required was to say nothing. The sum was simply astronomical, which in turn upset Andrew. The businessman knew he would not give up on his goal and would go all the way, no matter what it cost him. As a last resort, I could borrow some of it from my father. He always keeps a certain amount in the bank as a safety net. Of course, I would have to explain exactly why I need the money, but that's okay. I'll get out of it. That's the 10th thing, Andrew thought to himself. Unfortunately, the young businessman did not even realize that he had made one unfortunate mistake in his conclusions, and it was expressed, first of all, by the fact that it was voiced to the administrator, William. The cunning rascal realized at once that the boss was in trouble and had to spend an enriched sum of money with several zeros, the amount of which would drive anyone crazy. Having learned about it, William saw an opportunity not only to punish the restaurant owner, but also to make him on the verge of bankruptcy. The administrator realized that in order for Andrew to be able to pay for the operation of this beggar's mother, he needed to raise a tidy sum, which could be a nice help to start his own business. William had the right people. All that remained was to know where and when to catch this rich Pinocchio, hurrying to help some sick slum pauper. While the unsuspecting Andrew was collecting money, his administrator was working out a plan of robbery. William did not care about the fact that the money was for a very important cause, the importance of which was difficult to overestimate. But Andrew's mind at that moment was filled with very different thoughts. More than anything else, the young businessman wanted to understand, was Liam really his son, or was it a fatal coincidence? To find out, the businessman needed a hair from Liam's head that hadn't even noticed his loss. Liam had recently dined only at Uncle Andrew's restaurant and was delighted to be treated as an adult by the staff. Most of all, Liam liked the carco soup, which he was served by the owner of the restaurant on the first day of their acquaintance. Knowing the boy's tastes, Andrew always prepared something unusual for him. Despite the fact that the money for the operation was being collected rather slowly, Andrew was sure that he would be able to meet the deadline. At the same time, William was already preparing a gang of robbers for the robbery and subsequent elimination of his boss. He knew that if the action was successful, the strings would never lead to the customer, who by the time it culminated, would be lounging under the gentle sun of one of the resorts of the South. Everything was well thought out, and William was just waiting for the day when the businessman would pile up the money and go to the bank to pay for the boy's mother's operation. Having borrowed money from his father, Andrew, to his great joy, realized that he had finally collected the amount he was looking for. All that remained was to transfer the money to the details of the clinic, and then at least one of the most urgent problems would be solved. Andrew decided to go to the medical facility together with Liam. During this time, he had become so attached to the boy that even before the results of the DNA test were announced, he thought of him as his own son. Once again, after counting the money in his office, Andrew and Liam went to the car parked in the parking lot. At the door, he bumped into the receptionist, William, who, for some inexplicable reason, suddenly started talking a lot of nonsense about the beef from the last shipment, supposedly of very low quality. "Vidya, let's do this some other time, huh? Not now. I'm in a hurry, and I don't have time to go over these nuances with you, especially since the chef approved everything. What claims can there be?" answered Andrew irritably. But he hardly knew that William was simply stalling in order to give his accomplices time to arrive at the scene. They were to attack Andrew as he boarded the car. The place was rather deserted, despite the abundance of parked cars. Clutching a small leather briefcase with money under his arm, Andrew went to the parking lot. Next to him was Liam, who was so happy to be with this grown-up uncle, who was collecting money to help his sick mother. Andrew only had to walk about 50 meters to the salvation car, when out of nowhere 2 young men in masks appeared. Threatening Andrew with a knife, one of them made a sharp lunge, as a result of which the businessman felt all the lethal danger coming from the blade. Liam cried out at once, disorienting the attackers for a moment. Frankly, they weren't expecting a child to be standing next to the object of the robbery. That moment's hesitation was just enough for Andrew to hand the briefcase with the money to Liam and take the hit himself. "Run! Run, Liam!" the businessman shouted, trying to apprehend the robbers at all costs. And Liam ran as he had never run before. Navigating between the cars in the parking lot, the boy ran toward the security station, where the guard was supposed to be. The robbers were confused. Attacking a businessman with no money now made no sense. It was almost impossible to catch up with the boy, since he had already run to the guard post and stormed inside. The retired man, who was dozing in his chair, did not immediately understand what was going on, but according to a long-established army habit, he tried to react adequately to the boy's signal. Calling the police and an ambulance at the same time, the man took his baton and went outside. And there, the 2 scoundrels had already tried to take out their powerless anger on Andre. To their surprise, the businessman turned out to be strong in spirit and did not give up in the face of mortal danger. They fought to the death. At one point, the raiders tried to flee, but the retired businessman stunned one of the bandits with a powerful blow of his truncheon, and the other one was held by a traumatic pistol, which looked like an exact copy of the weapon. Somewhere in the distance, the sirens of an ambulance could be heard, followed by a reinforced police squad. Although he himself was badly hurt, Andrew was awake and most of all worried about Liam, who had saved him from certain death by his decisive actions. Because the businessman was shot in the leg, he had to be hospitalized and Liam had to go home to his mother. Although the wound was not serious, it still required expert care and treatment. Once under the doctor's care, Andrew visibly relaxed and after a sedative shot, fell into a sticky, anxious sleep. He dreamt of bandits, money flying in the air, and of course of Liam, who insistently called his name. When Andrew opened his eyes, he did indeed see the boy in front of him, with Jacob standing beside him. "How are you, son? Take it easy." "That's good. That's a hell of a snake you got on your chest. William, your administrator, he's the one who arranged the assassination attempt on you. As soon as his accomplices got to the station, they came right out with it. Gave up the boss," Dad said. "William? Is he a traitor? It just can't be." "We've been together for so many years," Andrew whispered. "Yes, that's right, William. He's had his eye on you for a long time. Jealous. There's a personal motive involved. His father used to work in my restaurant as a doorman, but then he started begging for tips and wasted it on vodka. He got drunk and I had to fire him, and I offered him treatment for alcoholism." Andrew went pale. Such details, even he did not know. It turned out that William not only dug under him all this time, but also had a personal score. It is only said that the son is not responsible for his father. In fact, it was quite different. Sighing sadly, Andrew winced at the pain in his wounded thigh and looked at Liam. The boy was holding a sheet of paper with many stamps and signatures. There was a happy smile on Liam's face. "Hi, Dad. I'm sorry I was wrong. You're not a pilot or even an astronaut. You're much better than that. You're a restaurateur," the boy exclaimed happily. Andrew looked at his father in surprise and realized that he knew everything. "Well, what did you think, son? What do you think, son? You've got the secrets of the court in Madrid. You did a paternity test, didn't you?" "I know I did. Well, while you were in the hospital, the answer came to our home address. You're not much of a conspirator, but thank you for your grandson. He looks just like you." "I remember that," Jacob said with a smile. Tears welled up in Andrew's eyes. They were so sincere that the father standing in front of him felt proud that he had raised such a son. "Oh, what about Kathy? The money for the operation," said Andrew. "Kathy's fine, son. I took the case under my personal supervision. Yesterday, she had an operation. The specialists say it was a success. The money has been transferred to the clinic, so we made it in time," Father hurried to reassure Andrew. Lying in a hospital bed, the young businessman could not believe that in such a short time his life had changed beyond recognition. Not long ago, he was an ordinary bachelor, forging money in his restaurant. And now, not only did he become a father, but also reveal a hidden enemy who had been digging under the owner of the establishment for years. As it turned out a little later, it was because of William's sabotage that the restaurant was making losses that had never happened before. He had deliberately purchased food at an undervalued price in order to make the quality of the food much worse. In addition, William siphoned money from the cash register from time to time, which kept the restaurant's profits steadily low. Now that he had his son and his all-powerful father by his side, Andrew was quickly on the mend. At the same time, Kathy was taking her first timid steps into her new life, devoid of pain and suffering. To a woman tormented by lingering illness, it all seemed like a fairy tale dream that would dissolve into a ghostly haze at the same time as the first rays of the sun. But in fact, it was a reality. It had been suffered and watered by the bitter tears of the heroes of this amazing story. Andrew had been discharged from the hospital before Kathy and was looking forward to the day when he could meet her with a bouquet of roses on the steps of the clinic. The businessman intended to give her his younger sister all the things he had been foolish enough to give to Emily. In the meantime, Andrew had already had time to visit Liam's late mother and beg her forgiveness. Kneeling on his knees, Andrew stroked the tombstone, white from time and winds, behind which rested the body of the woman who gave him a son and the meaning of life. The old cemetery keeper shook his head understandingly and tried not to disturb his visitor in his moment of heartbreak and grief. "Forgive me, Emily. I was a self-righteous fool for whom the attention of a beauty like you flattered my ego and nothing more. But now, I know that it wasn't all for nothing. Do you hear? I swear to you that from now on our son Liam and Kathy will never need anything ever again. Forgive me if you can, Andrew whispered, rising from his knees. At that moment, out of the dark October clouds, the bright sun suddenly appeared and covered Andrew with its bright rays like a blanket. The businessman understood that it was Emily, thus sending him a sign that she did not hold a grudge, and blessed him for a further happy life. About a week later, Kathy was discharged from the clinic and, to the thunderous applause of the medical staff, left on her own feet. And at the exit, she was already met by Andrew, Liam, and Jacob, for whom the girl had long since become family and friends. Ahead, a new life awaited them, in which there would be no place for lies and deceit, and love and sincere feelings would become the unshakable basis for this strong and friendly family.